Hello, we're going to take a look at the review, and we're going to do this with no calculators. Why? Because it says so. Why else? Because that's what we're supposed to do for the test, so I want to make sure I know what I'm doing. All right, so I am supposed to find the vertex. Using my chart knowledge from 2.1, the vertex of a standard form like this is the opposite of B. So there's my B value. My A is 1, B is -2, and C is -3. So the x-coordinate is the opposite of B over 2A, which is going to turn out to be 2 over 2, or 1. Keeping in mind that your vertex is a point. So I'm going to have a xy coordinates. Of course I'm joking, because it's me. To get the y coordinate, I need to plug in my x coordinate to the original quadratic function. So I'm going to have 1 squared. Now, in this case, thinking about parentheses, it's not that important because it's not negative. But a negative is always kind of a tricky feature. So I'm going to have 1 minus 2, which is -1, minus 3 more, so -4. So 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, secondly, I'm supposed to find the zeros. So those are my x-intercepts. So if I go back and look, we're supposed to be able to find those by factoring. So I'm looking for factors of 3 that will subtract to be 2. So there's not a lot of choices there. So I'm going to go with 3 and 1. And I need it to be a -2, so I'm going to arrange my plus and minus in this way. And then I'm going to go ahead and state my zeros. I don't really care how you write them. I guess technically they're points, but you can just say x equals -1, +3. You can just list the values. So at -1 and +1, 2, 3, those are going to be my x-intercepts. And I do want to sketch that accurately. And then the last thing it's asking me for is, it's not the last thing, a y-intercept. Okay, so the y-intercept is where is it crossing the y-axis. So I know it's going to be 0 something. And in this case, if I plug zeros in, and if you think about what the chart tells you, it's just going to be my C value. So it's going to be 0, -1, 2, 3. Keeping in mind that another feature, and I will warn you that I added this to our quiz. So another thing that you would want to be able to find is your axis of symmetry equation. It's a vertical line, so it's x equals, and it has to go through the x coordinate of your vertex. So it has to go through 1 in this case. So it's going to be this red dashed line. And so every point has a partner that's symmetrical over that. So this would have one as well. So I'd want to be able to see those points, and then you draw or sketch it as accurately as possible. So you are kind of responsible for making these relatively accurate. Now, this one's not giving us any good practice on the vertex form, but I definitely want to take a look at this and what to do when there's a negative out front, because that is something that I would want to know, and it's actually sort of a tricky aspect. It makes it all kind of complicated in terms of factoring. So one thing you can do is pull that negative out, and then you just have to make sure to take it out of every single element. And then that's still the same function. It's just like you're taking out the -1 out into the front. Okay, so let's go ahead and find the vertex. You can do that from the original or from what I did. It doesn't really make a difference. So I would go ahead and find the x-coordinate by taking the opposite of B. I'm just using the numbers from here. Since my B would have been a 4, I'm using -4 over 2 times A. But in this case, my A is -1. So I end up with -4 over -2, which is +2. And then I would plug that into my function. Now be careful with that, because you're going to have a negative, which is not a part of the squaring. And then you're going to have just the 2 squared, because that's what you're plugging in, plus 4 times 2 minus 4. So this whole thing is going to be a -4. We've talked about that since like Algebra 1. It's always confusing, but it's not included in the squaring, or there would be parentheses around it. So that's going to be a -4 plus 8 here in the middle, and then minus 4. So I actually end up with 0. So these are the kinds of numbers that would be on your quiz, and these are the kind of numbers that you really should be able to handle without your calculator. Okay, so that is my vertex. Keeping in mind that my initial equation has a negative a value, so I expect this to be opening downward. It asks me for x-intercepts. Okay, so if I went ahead, I can already see that there's an x-intercept. It's sitting there, right there. But let's pretend I don't know that. I'm going to come back up here, and I'm going to factor this. I need 4 in a way that adds up to 4. I still have that negative out in front, but it's like having a -1, so it does not contribute a 0 because you can't turn -1 into 0. So the way to make 4 in a way that becomes 4 is going to be 2 times 2. In order to get the -4 in the middle that they want, they both have to be negative. So it's not really super surprising to me that the only zeros that I get are 2. I just get that 1. And you guys, it's a factor that's repeated, therefore has multiplicity. And multiplicity of 2 because it's repeated. So one way to think of it would be x minus 2 squared. So if then you have a 0 of 2 with multiplicity of 2, keep in mind that means it's just going to bounce off the graph. So this all makes sense because that's going to be the vertex and it's not going to cross any other times. Now I need the y-intercept. Okay, well the y-intercept is going to be where it crosses the y-axis, and it's what I get when I plug in 0. So if I look back here, 0c puts me right here. And that's going to be down 1, 2, 3, 4. Keeping in mind that the thing this worksheet doesn't ask about, but the test will, is where's the axis of symmetry? Always an x equals equation. This one's going to be at 2 because it's always equal to the x coordinate of your vertex. And that means this guy is 2 away, so 2 on the other side will be its partner. And that's enough points for me to sketch my parabola. So I'd be looking for the points to be accurate, the information to be accurate, all that good stuff. So that's all just stuff from last year based on what is in your chart. Okay, so equation. A very important thing in an equation is an equal sign. So when you're asked for an equation, you're writing f of x equals, and then you're going to write your quadratic. It's a parabola, so you should be using an x squared. Opens down. Okay, so you know that you're going to need a negative a. Has x-intercepts, so these are my zeros of -2 and 3/4. So think about what that means. You've seen me do this all the time. Factors, zeros. I like to do that because it helps me keep in mind what they're telling me. So they're telling me that one of my intercepts is a -2 and the other is 3/4. Well, then I can use my brain to think backwards and say, oh, I must have a factor of x plus 2, and I must have a factor of 4x minus 3. And that's something like getting to that factor that you want to get good at. Now, let me piece together everything that I know. That means I'm going to be taking, I have my 2 zeros, because if it's a parabola, it's x squared, and x squared implies 2 zeros. So I have my 2 factors that go with it. So I have this and I have this. However, I do not have this. I don't have a negative. So I'm going to toss it out in front, but it's going to sit around and wait until I have foiled out these 2 things to get my quadratic. So that's hanging out in the front. Now I'm just foiling. First term is going to be 4x squared. Outside term is -3x. Inside is positive 8x. And last is going to be -6. So I'm going to have that negative out in front of 4x squared plus 5x when I can combine these two, and then -6. So then I'm going to distribute that negative and get -4x squared minus 5x plus, because the negatives cancel, 6. This is an equation that would create a parabola because it means a square. It would open down because it has a negative a value, and it would have x-intercepts or zeros of -2 and 3/4, which led me to these factors, which I then multiplied out to create it. So the idea is to understand that relationship between zeros and factors and the function. And equation, because I do not feel like giving up half points because I continually forget to put this part when that is an essential part of this equation, is having an equal sign. Okay, let us see. What are they really asking me here? Given the parabola, blah, 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 at what x values does the maximum occur? Or at what x value? So what's it asking me for? Maximum has to be the vertex, and this one opens down because A is negative. So it's asking where, at what x value. So it's really just looking for the x coordinate of that. So in order for me to find it, I take the opposite of my B value and put it over 2 times my A value. So I end up with -8 over -4. So that will occur at an x value of -2. So it's located at x equals, 2. Not negative, the negatives cancel. And then it says to find the maximum value. If you remember when we talked about 2, 3, I kept saying x is a location, it's a where. Y is a value. It's going to be the what. What is the maximum value? So think about how you find that. You plug it in you plug in what you got for x into the original function. I got a 2, it goes in here. I got a 2, it goes in here. It goes in for all of the x's. So doing a little PEMDAS, 2 squared is 4 times -2 is going to be -8 plus 16 plus 5. And so I end up with 13. So at x equals 2, I'm going to have a max of 13. So basically my vertex is located at 213, but it doesn't ask for the vertex. It asks you to talk about where it's located and what its value is. That is kind of the end of 2.1. And then it starts getting into concepts from 2.2. So, let's see. Let's just do the front. Give an equation for this function. All right, so an equation is going to be built from the factors, which comes from the zeros, which comes from looking. So here is a 0 at -2. It bounces off, so that's going to have some kind of even multiplicity. I guess I don't even know if it's 2, 4, 6, or 8, so I can pick. Because it says an equation. Like, there are more than one answer when it suggests that. My next 0 is at 0. And again, I have an even multiplicity because it's bouncing off the graph. And then my next 0 is at 1, which is just crossing across, like straight up. And so that's just going to be to the first power. No multiplicity. So I also know that my right end goes up, which is meaningful. It tells me that my leading coefficient is positive. And I see that my left end is going down, which means that I'm going to have an odd power when I'm completely finished. So what factor goes with a 0 of -2? X plus 2. I need it to be to an even function, and I don't really have a way of knowing that, what it is, so I'm just going to go ahead and put a square in there, which you can't see because I wrote it so tiny. What factor will go with a 0 of 0? Well, that would just be x. But again, I need an even power, so I'm going with a bare minimum of squared. And then what factor would go with this? I'm going with x minus 1, and it's not going to have any multiplicity, so it's not going to have a power. So I'm writing an equation. Equation requires an equal sign. I'm going to have an x squared, an x plus 2 quantity squared, and an x minus 1. That is factor form. If I was like bullied into multiplying it out, I could do that. That's not going to be something that I'm asking you to do, so you can leave it in this factored form. Demonstrates that you know what you're doing without using up too much of your time. So this is the opposite concept. So it's, well, actually it's the same exact concept: factors, zeros, multiplicity, and what it means to your graph. Oh, by the way, remember how I said the left and right business? First of all, there's nothing about this that would make it negative, so that's why the right's going to go up. And if you look at the powers, this is a 2, and a 1. So if I did the whole thing out, I'd have an x squared from the first, an x squared from the second, and a plain x from the third, plus a bunch of other jibber jabber. But these would become my first term, which would be x to the 5th. So that all makes sense because it's positive, so the right goes up, and it's odd, so the left would do the opposite. So my function matches with everything that you see on the graph. Okay, so let's scoot back over here. The factors they're giving me are an x to the 4th, an x plus 3 to the 3rd, an x minus 2 to the 4th, and a 2x plus 3 to the 2nd. So my zeros will be a 0 with a multiplicity. I'm going to put a little m up here because I don't have very much room. So I have a multiplicity of 4, which is even. I have x plus 3, so my 0 would be negative 3 with a multiplicity of 3, which is odd. X minus 2 is my next factor, so 2 is my next 0, multiplicity of 4 because it's repeated 4 times based on the power. And last but not least, I have negative 3 over 2 as my 0, and that has a multiplicity of 2, which is even. Okay, so let's go through this. I'm going to have a 0 at 0. It has a multiplicity of 4, which is even, so it's going to bounce there. Next, I have a multiplicity, I have a 0 at negative 1, 2, 3. It has an odd multiplicity of 3, so it's simply going to, well, actually that's higher than 1, so it's going to go ahead and snake across. My next one has a 0 of 2 with a multiplicity of 4. So at 2, it's going to have an even multiplicity, so bouncing off the graph there. And then my last 0 is located at negative 3/2 or 1.5. So negative 1.5, it has a multiplicity of 2, which is even, so that's going to bounce as well. Okie dokie, we need end behavior. So let's go back and take just these first pieces. So this would turn into a, well, negative. That's really essential to know. Then I have an x to the 4. This would turn into an x cubed. If I multiplied it out, this would turn into an x to the 4th. And this one would have the 2x, which would ultimately get squared. Okay, so I'm just working out the first term. So 2 squared, as you know, is 4. So when I go to do my first term, I have a negative, I have a 4, and then I have x to the 4th, 3rd, 4th, and 2nd. So 4 plus 3 is 7. 7 plus 4 is 11. 11 plus 2 is 13. I don't care that it's a 4. So if I missed that 2 earlier on, it would be okay. I care that it's negative and that that's odd because that tells me my end behavior. Because my leading coefficient is negative, my right end will go down. Because my because my degree is 13, which is odd, the left end will do the opposite. So I know that over on the right end, I need this to go downward. But I also need it to bounce off, so it's going to look like that. Okay, and then my left end should be going up from here. So it's going to come down, snake across, bounce here, and then there. Now, I do not know how far down each of these is going, so it doesn't matter. I need to know that I have a 0 located here, 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 and here. 1, 2, 3. that this is snaking across because it was a odd. And then it has to get back up here to bounce off of this, has to get back up to bounce off this, has to get back up to bounce off this. Then it goes back down, and my end behavior matches. All right. I am going to do one of these. Running out of voice steam. So it's long division. If it says to use long division, you should probably do that. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And it says to give my quotient and remainder. I will warn you that that is not how that's going to look on the answer key. It's going to actually just have you, I'm going to do this. It's going to have you write out the answer like we talked about. Why? Because that is what you're going to have to do later. So I'm going to ask you to write it in the way that you need to in calculus so that we have a better chance of being successful when we get there. So let's see. I'm going to take my time. Super easy to make a mistake with this. I start with 2x to the 4. What I'm watching for, and the reason I'm going slowly, is I'm watching for any powers of x that are missing in case I need to include a 0 as a space saver, but I do not. This one's going to be super hideous, and I don't have the option of doing synthetic, and that's how it would be on the quiz, because I'm not going to make you do long division when you could have used the shorter version. So I'm going to have out here my thing that I'm dividing by, and now I'm going to start thinking. But I'm not going to think about everything. I'm just going to think about this piece and this piece. And I'm either going to be asking myself, what do I need to multiply x squared by to turn it into 2x to the 4th? The answer would be 2x squared. Or you can ask yourself, what if I take 2x to the 4th and divide it by the x squared, which is actually what you're doing, what do I get? Either way, you get 2x squared. So it's just a matter of what you think. That one is getting a little lost. Now, I am going to be multiplying this by the stuff on the side. I'm going to be distributing that 2x squared to everything. So take your time on this. 2x squared times x squared is 2x to the 4th. 2x squared times 2x is 4x to the 3rd. 2x squared times that negative 1 is minus 2x squared. Now I'm going to go through and subtract the second line. So 2x to the 4th minus 2x to the 4th is gone as it should be. 5x to the 3rd minus, because I'm subtracting the bottom row, 4x to the 3rd is going to leave me with 1x to the 3rd. Then I'm looking at negative 3x squared minus a negative, which will turn to positive and leave me with a negative, I lost my place, x squared, bringing down my minus 7x. Okay, then I start over. Then I think, what is going to turn my x squared into an x cubed? And the answer is multiplying it by a positive x. Now I do the same thing again. I'm going to go ahead and multiply this x on the top by everything, distributing it to everything on the side. X times x squared, x times a 2x, and x times a negative 1. Big fat line, start going through to subtract. X cubed minus x cubed is canceled as it should be. Negative x squared minus 2x squared is going to become a negative 3x squared. And then my my negative 7x, I'm right here. I kind of lost what I was doing. My negative 7x minus negative is going to turn into a positive. So I'll be at negative 6x, and I'll be bringing down the 3. I am running out of room. All right, well, I should only have one round anyway. Now I'm going to ask myself, what does it take to turn my x squared from out here to be negative 3x squared? And the answer is a negative 3. And I'm going to multiply that negative 3 times everything on the side like I have been. So I get negative 3x squared. Negative 3 times my 2x becomes negative 6x. And negative 3 times my negative 1 becomes a positive 3. So if I came through here, thankfully, in my next step, and I did minus a minus, that would cancel. Minus this minus, that would cancel. And 3 minus 3 would be gone. So this one went in evenly with a remainder of 0. So when you go to write your answer is straight up 2x squared plus x minus 3. You do not have to write plus the remainder over what you divided by because you didn't get a remainder. So this thing on the top is simply your answer. And the remainder is 0, which, by the way, means this thing you divided by is a factor of the top equation. So the last thing I am going to do before calling it quits, and then I'll make another video for the remainder of it, is I am going to do a division where it does need some spaces. So I don't even know if I'm going to have enough room, so I'm going to sure try. On the outside, I have x squared, but a plus 0x and then minus 5. And it'll be a miracle if I can fit this in here. So let's see if I can. I'm going to have an x to the 5th plus 0x to the 4th plus 0x to the 3rd plus, I think there's no way that I can fit this in. Let's try again. I'm going to scoot over. All right. So I'm dividing x squared plus 0x minus 5 into x to the 5th, then no x to the 4ths, and no x to the 3rds, and 4x to the 2nds, and no x's, and then a 6. Bleh. Okay. Then I'm going to just look at the pieces I really need, this one and this one. So to get my x squared to become an x to the 5th, I'm going to need an x to the 3rd. Then I'm going to multiply that x to the 3rd times everything out here, the whole thing. When I do, I'll get x to the 5th plus this x cubed times this 0x is going to be 0x to the 4ths. And then minus 5x cubes coming through here. When I do x to the 5th minus x to the 5th, it's gone. 0 plus or minus 0 doesn't matter. But this next one, 0x to the 3rds minus 5, you're doing minus a negative because you're subtracting that bottom row and it becomes a positive. So I'm going to have 5x to the 3rd. And since this row had 1, 2, 3 things, I might actually want to bring down the next 2 things. So this is going to, because every single time it's going to have 3 things if it did in that first round. And so I'm bringing down this 0x as well. And then it's just time to think again. How do I make this x squared into a 5x cubed? And the answer is to multiply it by 5x. I like to line my stuff up. So these were plain x's, x cubes. It helps me kind of figure out when I'm done because I get to the end of my division row. Okay, now I'm going to multiply this 5x on the top times everything over here. When I do, 5x times x squared, 5x times 0x, and 5x times negative 5. Okay, line, subtract. 5x cubed minus 5x cubed, gone. 4x squared minus 0x squared is going to be, not gone. It's going to be a 4x squared. And then 0x minus negative 25 is going to bring down a positive 25. And then I'm going to drop this 6 so that I have 3 pieces ready to rock and roll. I must be getting to the end. Makes me super happy. You too, I'm sure. So start over again. How do I get a 4x squared from my x squared? And the answer is to multiply it by 4. So that's what I'm going to do. 4 multiplied by everything in there. So 4x squared, 0 x's, minus 20 from the 4 times 5. Line, subtract. 4x squared minus 4x squared, gone. 25x minus 0 is 25x. 6 minus a negative 20 turns into addition, and I get 26. My friends, I'm at the end of the row, plus you can't make x squared into a 25x by multiplying because it's too big. So this whole thing is going to be my remainder. So how do I write my solution? I take the thing on the top, because that's how many times it went in evenly. I add, and you can put little parentheses around it if it makes you happy. You add whatever you got as a remainder over the thing that you divided by. This whole deal is like your mixed number answer. This one didn't have a remainder, so it didn't have anything after what we got up here. But what we got up here was the whole part, but I still had a remainder. So this is how I would write my answer. And so on the quiz, it's going to tell you to write it in proper form. That's what I'm referring to. I think that's enough fun for right now. I'll come back and do the synthetic division and the rest of this stuff in a separate video. Just cause. All right, hope that was a good start. Bye.